What's good everyone, welcome to the channel. This is the first video that I'm posting. In this video I'm going to teach you how to write code. I'm not going to teach you specific programming language, but more the fundamental principles of writing code for problem solving. If you're about to go to university to study computer science, this video has everything you need, the stuff I wish I knew for the first year. The first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get set up with an environment on our local computer. And the program that we're going to use to do that is a program called VS Code, which is an IDE or Integrated Development Environment. And to do that, all we got to do is come to Google and search VS Code. That'll come up with a list of results here. You can see this Visual Studio Code is the top one. If you visit the download link, click on the Windows button, and then the download should start automatically. And the other one that we're going to need is something called Node.js. So we can just search for Node, and this will come up with Node.js, and then download and install. You can go, if you're on Windows, you can go to the pre-built installer, just click on that, download it and install it onto your computer, and at that point you should have VS Code and Node.js installed. We're going to need Node.js because we're going to be using JavaScript for this lesson, but like I said, the language isn't really that important. It's more the principles underlying the language. Once you've mastered the principles in this video, you'll be able to apply them to Python or to Java or to C# or to any other programming language. Okay, so hopefully you've got that done. What we're going to do now is we're going to make sure that everything's working. So I've just hopped onto my virtual machine here. I'm going to open up VS Code. Once VS Code's open, I'm going to go here to the terminal. I'm going to click on New Terminal, and then just under here, I'm going to type in npm version, and then if I've got npm installed correctly and it's all working fine, this should just return with the version of npm that I'm using. So now we know that npm is working and we've got Visual Studio working. So before we get into it, let's go through some of the types of things that we're going to be dealing with when we're writing code. So when I say the types of things that we're dealing with, the types of data that we're going to be dealing with. The first thing that we've got usually is something that's called an int, and that is something like 1 or 2 or 3 or 34, basically just a whole number. Then you've got a float, which is something that looks like that, and a float I believe is up to 32 bits. That's the amount of space that's allocated to store that number. You've got something called a double, which is similar to a float, but it can hold a lot more information. I believe that a double is 64 bits worth of, that's how much it takes to store that. Then we've got something called a string, which is basically a load of characters in a sentence or so. A string is just a number of different characters. Then we've got char or character, which is basically like A, B, D, capital U, something like that. That's what a char is. And then we've also got something called a boolean or a bool, and this is either true or false. And that's basically it for the basic types of data that we're going to see when we write code. This is the stuff that we're going to be dealing with, so it's useful to know. Now that we know that, we can start to look at how we can write a program. So let's do that. So I'm going to get all of this text I've just written, and I'm going to do something which is very JavaScript specific, but I'm basically just going to print this to the terminal. So I've got this thing called a console log, which is going to log this text, this string, to the console, and basically that's what this program is going to do when I run it. So if I save this, I come down here and I put node index.js, you can see when the program runs, hello world is printed to the terminal. So this is like a real basic program in JavaScript that just when you run it, it just prints hello world. So I'm just going to quickly clear the terminal. So in JavaScript, we don't need to worry about what type of data that we're dealing with when we declare the data. For example, I can say let name equals vil, and then I can console log name. I don't know why that's crossed out, but let's try it. There you go. It's printed name to the console. Now the interesting thing with JavaScript is, and this is more JavaScript specific, because you couldn't get away with doing this in something like Java, but you could in Python. We could say name is now equal to false, and then after that we could console log name just to make sure that that's happened. So if I just clear the output, type in node, first of all vil was a string, and then the string became false. So that's why I decided to use JavaScript to teach this lesson, because there's not much restriction on what happens with the data. Obviously, if you learn something like TypeScript, you'd start to get a little bit more sort of rigid with the ways that you can allocate values to variables. But in JavaScript, 1 minute it can be a string, 1 minute it can be an integer, 1 minute it can be a float. That's just how JavaScript works. So another thing that we could just quickly go through is the type of arithmetic that we'll see. So we could say console log 1 plus 1, and that's just going to be 1 plus 2, 1 plus 1, that's just going to be 2. We can say console log 10 divided by 10, or 10 divided by 10. We can say 10 multiplied by 10, and we can also say 10 minus 10, like 1 as an example. So this is how you do mathematics. You also can do BODMAS, or whatever you guys call it these days. So we could say 1 plus 1 times 2. So basically you could just isolate out bits of your calculations like that. And then when we run this, usually it's helpful if I save the file. We get all of the results come through. So that's basically the sort of arithmetic that we can do. An interesting point to note at this point is if we say vil and we put plus is cool. So if we add up two strings, let me just quickly clear all of this stuff, save the file, run it, and then you can see we can do arithmetic with strings, but all it's going to do is what they call concatenate. So it's just going to merge. It's like if you had a tape with words on it and tape with words on it, you just glue the two bits of tape together to make one bit of tape. That's how that works. So now we need to think about conditional stuff. Like if something meets a certain condition, it's then allowed to do something, or if it doesn't meet the condition, it's not allowed to do something. So let's say that we've got a variable called having fun equals false. We can say if having fun console log if you're having fun, console log, I'm having fun. Otherwise, let's console log. Otherwise, let's console log, I'm not having fun. So, if we run that, it says I'm not having fun because fun is false. So if we change this to true, save that, and then we run the program again, you can see I am having fun. So this is one type of conditional statement that we could do. Another one is we could have a switch statement. So we could say switch, and then we could say having fun, and then inside of the switch statement we can give a case where it's true, and then we can we could and then we'll break that, and then you could either have a case which is false, or in the case of switch statements you usually have a default case. So if it doesn't hit any other condition, then it will hit the default, and then obviously we can just copy and just write I'm not having fun, and finish that off with a break. So you'll notice every now and again I put a semicolon on the end of my sentence, on the end of each line. It's not necessary in JavaScript, but in Java it is necessary. So I kind of have inbuilt habits where I usually just put semicolons on the end of the lines, but it works without, and if it works, it works. So let's see what this is saying now. Let's clear that and let's run the program. I am having fun. So another thing to notice, so this is exactly the same as what we did a minute ago with this if statement, but we've done it with a switch statement. And what we can do is we can put a bang in front of this, and basically this bang here just means not. So this statement is checking to see if this condition is true, and at the moment it is, but now this little bang here is saying if this statement is not, if that makes sense. So now basically this is switch not having fun. So if I run the program now, you can see that it's not having fun because it's got a different condition in here. So that's a switch statement. So you got if statements, you got switch statements. So another thing to know about is inside of these conditional statements, we might want to check if having fun, well, it doesn't really work in a switch statement. So let's just quickly change this back to an if. So, so we might want to check that this is a specific value, and the way that we would do that in JavaScript, because it's different for all languages, but the principle is the same, and that's what we're concerned with in this video, is just the principles. So we can check to see, let's say that having fun equals 1. Okay, we can check to see if having fun is equal to 1, and if so, print I'm having fun. Else, and let's try else if having fun is equal to 2. Let's just say that that's an encoding for we're not having fun. So I could basically just copy this and put I'm not having fun. And then finally we can put a final else, which is basically the same as the default case. So if it's not caught by any of these two conditions, then it will just print. And we'll call this meh. So he's having fun, he's not having fun, and this guy's just like meh. So if I run this now, which one of these statements is going to be printed? I'd like to think that everyone straight away says I'm having fun. So let's give it a go. I'm having fun. Okay. So what happens if we wanted to check? Well, let's do the rest of them. So let's say 2, save, and then run that. He's not having fun. If we change this to 3, save, and we ran that, it's meh. If we change it to anything else, if we change this to false, save that, and then we ran that, it's going to print meh again. So basically this condition wasn't met, this condition wasn't met, and therefore it was caught in this condition, which is the same as the default condition in the switch statement that we wrote a minute ago. Now another thing that we might want to check, if I just create a simple if statement, maybe we want to check that it's not equal to 1. And this will be different, the syntax will be different in all languages, but the principle is the same. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say is not equal to 1. Save. So if we print this now, it should say I'm having fun, because false is not equal to 1. If we change false to 1 and we run the program, nothing happens because it didn't meet this condition. Okay, so those are conditions, sort of like if and switch. That's how we're going to check to see if the thing that we're looking at right now is equal to or not equal to. Basically we'll be able to find the things that we're looking for when we're writing code. All of this will become a little bit more obvious in a minute. I'm just trying to get a foundation of knowledge behind us before we move on to stuff that's too technical. Speaking of stuff that's too technical, let's look at arrays and like how we would loop through data. So let's have a list here. So let class equals, and then let's have a list, which is okay, class. Let's change that to students, because class is a sort of a keyword that's allocated by programming languages usually, because a class is a class. It's like a type of information. So let's say we've got a list of students. We've got Will, we've got Dave, we've got Gemma, and we've got Rosie. So now what we've got is we've got this list of students here. And let's say that we wanted to print out all of the students' names. So a good way to do this would be to use a for each loop, but specifically in this this lesson here, I'm going to teach the most difficult version of the for loop. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because it's probably the most helpful thing that you could have in your toolkit, is to be able to write out a loop the difficult way, basically. It's not difficult, but so the way we do this is we would go for, and then we're going to say we're going to use a variable called I. So let's let I equal 0. Then what we're going to say is we're going to say I is less than students dot length, and then I++. So for a start, let's just students.length. And this dot length here is JavaScript specific, but in any language that you work in, you'll be able to find the length of the array. So what this for loop is saying let I equal 0. So we've created this new variable called I. It's going to start off as 0, and then it's going to run through. It's going to do one iteration through the loop. Then I is going to be 1. Then it's going to do another iteration through the loop. I is going to be 2, etc. What this condition here is saying, keep doing that until I is. Keep doing that as long as this condition is satisfied, where I is less than the student's length. So if I is 0, that will be Will. If I is 1, that will be Dave. If I is 2, that will be Gemma. And if I is 3, that will be Rosie. Notice how when we're dealing with this sort of stuff, we start counting from 0. We don't start counting from 1. So Will is the 0th element, Dave is the first element, Gemma is the second element, etc. That's probably one of the hardest things when you first start writing code to wrap your head around. You've spent your whole life starting counting from 1. Now we're going to start counting from 0. So this and then what this is saying, this third bit here, is every time we go through the loop, just add 1 to I. So what we could do here is we could console log, I'll put something here, I value, or like I value, and then I'm gonna plus I. So all that's gonna do is, I'll just comment this out for a second. If you what I've just put there is a comment. So basically, if I don't want to execute this code, I can just make it a comment, and then when the program runs, it's not going to execute that code. So let's see guesses for what's going to happen. I reckon it's going to print I value colon 0, I value colon 1, I value colon 2, and I value colon 3. I reckon that's what it's going to print out. So let's try that. There you go. So that's all well and good, but it's not really helped us with our problem. So let's just quickly comment this out, and let's just confirm that this console log statement is printing 4. The reason we want this to print 4 is because there's 4 items in here. And this is where it gets confusing, because this is the 3rd element in the array, but it's the 4th item, if that makes sense. So let's save that, clear the console, let's run that, and we are indeed getting 4. So this loop here is going to start when I is equal to 0, it's going to add 1 to it each time until it gets to 3, which will be this person here. So what we can do now is we can print out all of our people's names. So let's try that. Let's say students, and the way that we access elements inside of an array like this is we use square brackets and we put a number in there. So just to help you out a bit, if I put students 0 there and I comment out this and then I run the program, you can see it's printing out Will. If I put students 3 and I run the program again, it's going to print out Rosie. So with that said, we could create this for loop to now just go through and print out all the people's names by putting this variable that changes each iteration through the loop. So if I just run that, you can see now it's gone through that list and it's printed out each person's name. So a second ago I did say that there was a different way of writing a for loop, and I wasn't going to cover it, but I might as well just take you through it now. But I would like you to learn how to write a for loop like this. It's literally, the way I do it is I always do the same thing. So if I'm writing an if statement, I'll put the brackets and I'll put the curly brackets, and then I'll put my condition in here. Same with a for loop. If I'm doing for, do the brackets, the curly brackets, and everything like that. So once we've got that, now I just need to create a new variable, let I equals 0. And what I like to do is keep these together, have a space, and then put I is less than some number, and then I plus plus. That's how you write a for loop. If you can remember how to do that, and you go into uni, it's really going to help you out. So I'd take 10 minutes, learn how to do that. But there is another way of doing it. So if we go for, and we go let x in students, and then now we can go students x, and then what I can do is I can just comment this out. Notice how I can grab a whole line, a few lines of code like that. I can hold control and then the sort of backslash button, and that will comment out that code so it won't execute. Then what we do, save that file, come here, clear the output, and then if we run the program again, you can see it's doing the exact same thing. Just this time we've used a different notation for the for loop, and this is the same in most languages. This structure here is transferable between languages, but usually in like Python you'd be doing stuff like this. That's how we'd iterate through an array. So let's say that we wanted to run a loop until a certain condition was met. We didn't necessarily want to run through the whole loop. We just wanted to run until something happened that we're interested in. So what we could do is we get rid of this for loop here. We've got something called a while loop. So if I say let found equals false, right? So let's say we're going to look, the problem is we're going to look for Gemma, right? So what we'll do is we'll create a while loop, and we'll do it the same way that we do everything else. And then what we're going to say is while found student. So at the moment, found student is false, and this won't run whilst this is false. So what we can say is while we've not found the student, then it will iterate through, and we can also have let's say let student equals 0. So what we could do here is we could have a conditional check to see if the person we're looking at is Gemma. Let's say we want to look for Gemma and return their position in the array. So what we could do is we could go if students, and then we could put student index, because this is going to go through all the students, and then this is going to be a number 0, then hopefully it'll be a number 1, then it'll be a number 2. So if student's index is equal to Gemma, then console log the index position, which is going to be this student index. So we've got this while loop. And while it's not found, so while this statement is false, keep going through this loop and check the value of the current student that you're looking at, which is denoted by the student index. Check to see if that's equal to Gemma. This won't work because I need to put this into quotes because it's a string. And then it will console log the index of that student. So the last thing we need to do to make this for loop work, because if you run this now, it will never stop. We need to say, if it is found, we'll need to say found student equals true. Okay, which will basically at that point, once it's found this student, it will change this value here, which is currently false, to true, which means that this while loop will stop executing and will then arrive here at the bottom to execute the next bit. There's still a problem with what we've done so far, and this will run forever as well, because we're not updating the student index here. So what we want to do here, there's a few ways of doing this. So for example, you could go student index equals student index plus 1. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be student index plus equals 1. And then another way of doing it would be student index plus plus. So what I'll do is I'll just stick with the last one. And then what I'm going to do to prove that this actually jumps out of the loop, let's save that. So what's going to happen now, we've written a small program that's going to go through this list of people here, and it's going to print out which position Gemma is at, and as soon as it's found Gemma, it's then going to change this to true. This while loop will jump out of the while loop, and then it will print this. In between each iteration of the while loop, so as it goes down, the student index is 0. So this is looking for the 0th student, which is Will. Then it won't find it, and it will add 1 to student. Then it will go back to the top, and it will say if students 1, which is Dave, equals Gemma. It won't find that, so then it will skip past this if statement. It will add 1 to it, then it will go back to the beginning, and now it will be 3. So if the third student is Gemma, which it is, then it's going to print this student index, which is the 3, and then it's going to switch this to true, which means we jump out of the loop, and then it's going to print this, which means we could write more code after this. Well, whenever you see something like this, it just means we could carry on writing code now. So let's see if that all works as we planned. So I said Gemma was 3, but I was actually wrong because it's 0, 1, 2. So in my explanation, I messed up a little bit, but hopefully you caught that. That's mostly, there are other things that we could go through in terms of iterating. For example, there's something called a do while loop, but I actually don't think that I've ever used a do while loop, so I'm just not going to cover it. So yeah, that's it for the first part. The next thing we're going to look at is how to implement functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all this stuff. I'm just going to delete everything. I'm going to save it. I'm going to clear the terminal so we get a fresh start. Okay, so in JavaScript, we want to be able to run functions, not in JavaScript, just in programming in general. You might find that you have a specific task that you do quite a lot, and what we want to do is we want to write code once and then reuse it every time it's needed. We don't want to just keep duplicating code everywhere throughout our program, because if we change something, we're going to have to change it in loads of different locations. So the idea is we write functions and then we let the program share those functions. So, and also defining a function will have different syntax for every language. The syntax I'm going to show you here is JavaScript, obviously, but the fundamental principle stays the same. What makes a function? So let's quickly write out a function that just prints hello world, and then let's discuss the parts of it. To declare a function, I'm going to create a constant. Just to go over that as well. In JavaScript, you've got two types of variables. You've got let, which is we call something let if we're going to change it in the future. But if we've got a constant, it means that that value will never change. So for example, if I've got const number equals 1, right? I can't then go number equals 2, and if I try and run this, let's see what kind of errors we get. See, because I've called it a const here, I'm not able to change the value, so it's basically come up with this error, assignment to constant variable. When we declare a function, it's going to be a constant, it's not going to change. Demo function, and then so that's the syntax for a function. Okay, let's do a similar example to what we did in the last example, where we were looking for a person's name, or looking for a certain person. So now we're going to do the exact same thing that we did in the last thing that we did, but we're just going to do it with a function. Let's give this function a name. So these brackets here are what I'm going to pass into the function. I'm going to pass in a name, okay? Which means when I call this function, so I'm going to pass it through, as example, Gemma, because I'm looking for Gemma, right? This is where we can basically do the same thing that we did in the last lesson, where we write the for loop that looks for Gemma. I'll just quickly bash that out quick. Okay, what I've done there is I've hard-coded Gemma. Let's not do that. Let's say if name is equal to the student, the ith student. So if this name here, which is this variable, is what we pass into the function when we call it. So where you see this name, you could think of that as Gemma for this instance, because if we called this with Dave, then this would become Dave. So this is why we call it a variable. So because this could be any value, it could be Dave, it could be Rosie, it could be Jonathan, it could be whatever. So now what we're going to do is we're going to return I. So that brings us to the next point about a function. So the syntax of how to write the function out, and this is called an ES6 arrow function, which is JavaScript specific, but functions are the same. They take things, they do stuff, they send it back, they send back a result. So what this has done is it's taken a name, it's doing some stuff here, and then once it's found the right student, it's returning I. So it's going to return 2 in this instance, because 0, 1, 2. But we're not using that at the moment. So what we need to do down here is we need to go let student number equal, and then down here we can console log student number. Sorry, force of habit, putting semicolons everywhere. You don't need to do that, it's just me. Okay, so let's think about this before we run it. Save it. So we've got our list of students. we've written this function called demo function, which will basically, it will take a student name, which we're passing it here, and it's going to do the same thing that we did in the last lesson, where we're going through a for loop through all of the students. If name, which is Gemma in this instance, is equal to student's I, which when this number here is 2, it will return, and when it returns, it will exit the for loop, it will stop executing everything, and it will just return that value. Even so, Gemma's the third one here. This if statement will never consider Rosie, because by the time it's got to Gemma, it's found Gemma, it's going to return I, which is the position of Gemma, and that's what we're looking for, which is why we've populated it here. And then all we're doing is we're just printing that out here. So let's quickly clear the terminal and let's run this. Boom. So we've got a 2 back, and that's basically to denote where Gemma is in this array. So that's how we write a function. Okay, so something else that's quite interesting at this point in time is something called scope. Okay, so for example, if I said let my name equal Vil, right? If I wanted to use this variable, I could just go here, console log my name, and that would print Vil to the console, right? But when we're writing functions, there's something called scope. It's kind of like all of the information within that function is encapsulated within that function. So I can't grab this console log and put it outside of the function, because if I do that, it's not going to know what my name is. We could try and run it and see, but I guarantee it's not going to print out my name. Just quickly save it. There you go. My name is not defined. So we've got my name here, which equals Vil, so surely it is defined. But when we try and print it outside of the function, it doesn't work. Likewise, now this isn't to do with scope, this is to do with the nature of the function, in that it's returning, it's exiting the function once it's returned. I can prove that by putting this here. So now this will print my name, but it also won't print my name because it's not going to make it to the end of this for loop. So remember, the student's length is going to go up to 4, so it's going to be 0, it's going to be less than 4, so it's going to go up to 3. So it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to exit the loop and then print here. But this won't actually reach, I won't actually reach 3 because we're returning the function when it's on 2. So therefore it will return, the whole function will finish functioning, and this will never get executed because we've actually found what we want. So this is kind of like, if we're looking for something, we could say let found thing equals false, right? And then inside of the loop, instead of returning, we could change found thing to equal to true, and then afterwards we could do something with found thing if we want to. But as it stands, we're returning this, so we don't need this variable to do that. So let's just prove that this doesn't print my name. Boom. So like we explained, as soon as it hits that student name, which is equal to the name that we put in, it returns that number. Nothing else is executed in that function. That function is not needed anymore. Let's say that one of our students, Gemma, she actually wanted to change her name because maybe she didn't like being called Gemma, so now she wants to be called Gem. So what we could do is, we could, instead of returning I here, we could say students and then I, which is going to be, in this case, if Gemma is equal to students I is now equal to Gem. Or we could add another parameter, another variable to the function saying change name. And then we could pass through Gem. And then here, instead of hard coding Gem, we could put change name. Save. So now what we've done is we've got rid, this function doesn't return anything anymore. So there's no point in trying to allocate the result of this function to a variable like student number, so we can get rid of that because this function doesn't return anything. But now we've got this we've got this variable here that doesn't print anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out students. I'm just going to print the whole array just to see what happens. So what we're talking about now is how do we change the values of items inside of an array. And the way that we do that is we just tell it which item we want to change, and then we allocate a new value to that item. So in theory, this should, there you go, you can see it's printed out Gemma, but instead of her being called Gemma, she's called Gem. That's how you access and change values in an array. Okay, so let's say that we wanted to have a function that deleted something from the list. It removed it. We don't want to change the name of Gemma. We just want to delete Gemma from the list of students because she's left. She did really well, and she didn't have to finish the class. She graduated already. So what we're going to do is, it's always useful to have meaningful names for your functions, so that well, what makes sense to you today won't make sense to you in 3 days' time. So it's always good to have good naming conventions. So to adapt this, we're not going to return anything out of this function. What we're going to do is we're going to use, first of all, we're going to get rid of this change name because we don't need that. I'm just going to comment out this line here. And then when we call this function, we're not passing it change name anymore, we're just passing it Gemma. So the way the function works now is we're going to pass it Gemma. It's going to look for Gemma. As soon as it finds Gemma, it's going to do something. This is what I always do as well. This stuff you see here is kind of like pseudocode. So I'll get myself to a certain point of the function, to the function, and I'll print out. So for example, if I console log here, so students I, when I run it now, I should expect to see Gemma written here, which means that I know that I've got the right person. So once I've tested it and I know that Gemma's there, now I can do the something that I want to do. So let's quickly have a look at this function that we're writing. The function doesn't have a return statement, so it's not returning anything. Remember I said you pass stuff into a function, the function transforms it, and then it sends something back. Well, sometimes you don't pass anything to the function, but the function always does something. It always transforms or does something, either finds it and returns it, or it just transforms it, and that's what we're doing here. So the whole point of that is there's no point in this let student number equals, because this function is not going to send anything back, so we don't need that. And then now this student number crashes, so let's just quickly change this for students. So we print the whole array. Now we're going to use a very specific JavaScript specific function to do this for us. But if you were going to do this in Python, you could just say how to remove element from an array in Python, or in Java, how to remove element from an array in Java, etc., etc. It's the principle's the same. We're doing the same thing. We're just using a different syntax or different functions that are provided by the various languages. So for this, we're going to go dot splice, and the way that splice works is it will splice on a specific index, and we know that we want to get rid of gemma, so that is index of I, and then it also wants to know how many it needs to delete. In this case, we just want to delete one, which is gemma. So when we save that, when we run this code now, I'll just get rid of this comment. When we run this code now, in theory, it should print the list of students minus gemma. And there you go, list of students minus gemma. Okay, so let's pretend that instead of removing a student, we want to add a student. So I'll quickly add student. This time we're going to take a name and we're going to add that student, but let's say we want to add Rob to the class. So Rob's just moved in from a different country, and he's basically about to join our class, so we need to put him on the register so that we know if Rob's in or not when we call his name in the morning. So for all that, we don't really need any of this logic here. All we need to do is we just need to say name. So with this syntax here, this JavaScript syntax of adding elements to an array, same again. How do I add an element to an array? Python. How do I add an element to an array? Java. Just search up the language you're doing. The principle's the same, but the syntax is different. So when we run this now, I mean, technically we could just not do this in a function. We just get rid of all of this, and we could just put Rob. Nice and simple. Let's just clear the output. So now when we run this, you can see we've got our list of students, and this time we've got Rob in it. So as far as programming goes, basically everything covered in this lesson I've just literally gone through now. This is like the foundation, like the rock on which you build your knowledge. When it comes time for learning actual JavaScript, because we're using JavaScript here to learn how to write code, but we're not really using it in the way that it was originally intended for. So don't get hung up on languages at the moment. Things that you need to know is types of data that we've got, sort of conditional statements like the if-else statements, so that we can look for stuff and we can check to see if conditions are right or wrong. Then you've got like the loops, like the for loop, the for each loop, the while loop that we saw earlier. Also the switch statements with reference to the if. And then, yeah, then you've got stuff like arrays, how to add stuff to arrays and stuff like that. So just to push this a little bit further, because I don't want to go too deep today. I just want surface level, basic fundamental principles that you need if you're going to like university year one. If you know this stuff, then you're going to breeze the first year. Basically, you'll be able to get by. And obviously, whilst you're solving the problems that you come across, you'll also be learning different things, and you'll be learning different languages and stuff like that. So just to push this a little bit further, let's talk about something that is called an object. So let's say that we've got a person called Dave, and we can say that Dave is an object, right? So we can say that Dave is 23 years old. His favorite movie is 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler. His girl's name is Mary. So this is basically what we've defined here is an object, right? So let's say that we wanted to print Dave's age. What we could do is we could Dave.age. So if we clear the terminal and we run that, you can see it prints Dave's age. Or let's say that we wanted to print Dave's favorite movie. Save, clear the output, run that again. Boom, 50 First Dates. So this is how we start to work with objects where, for example, you could have Dave, we could have John, he's 28, his favorite movie is 50 First State, and his girl's name is also Mary. Those guys are not going to like each other when they find out. So what we can do now is we can go let students equals an array, and inside that array we've got Dave and John, right? So now we can start to write a for loop, and we could say let I equals 0, I be less than students dot length I plus plus, and then here we could just console log students I dot favorite movie. So what this is going to do now is it's going to go through the list of students that we've got here in an array, and it's going to print out the favorite movie for each of those students, if that makes sense. So let's clear that. Boom. So Dave likes 50 First Dates and John likes 50 First State. So this is just like an introduction to like using objects, and objects are usually defined in like classes, and I don't really want to get into like the sort of classes and stuff in the scope of this tutorial because it's not needed. I mean, it is needed, but not for basic, you know, when you go on like LeetCode or these sort of interview practice type coding challenge type websites. You're not going to need to worry about classes and stuff like that. So I mean, obviously at university you should learn what they call object oriented programming from the first year, but for now, whilst we're just trying to get our heads around how this all works, I thought I'd just show you a little bit of it, and basically show you the direction in which we're heading. But for now, this is kind of like a little bit more advanced stuff for what we're talking about. So, I mean, I think that's it for this first tutorial. Please make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, because what I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to start building on the knowledge that we've built on with JavaScript, and I'm actually going to start teaching a little bit of JavaScript, like how do we use it in the context of building websites, or even as a back end when we're serving information to websites that are requesting it. So yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll be releasing more videos shortly in the future. Peace.